I think it's great in sloganeering terms to talk about net zero, but the thing that no one is honest about is that some of the world's top scientists think it's a complete lie. If you were genuinely going for gross zero, then you could stick within 1.5, but people are not being honest. We're heading towards 3.5. There's going to be huge numbers of deaths, and I think it's going to be far sooner than we thought.
Thank you all for coming, and thank you all for the questions. We have a hell of a lot of questions that have already come in. We probably need the duration of a cricket game to get through them all, but we only have an hour. So if we don't ask your question specifically, I've got all the questions that have been submitted in front of me, and I might paraphrase some of them, but hopefully we'll get to hear from those of you in person in the room and those from who are watching at home. I'm David Wood. I'm the political correspondent at ITV West Country. So I'm here just to make sure that these guys all get a say, you get your questions through to them, and no one goes on for too long. On the panel, Tessa Munt, who's a Liberal Democrat councillor and former MP for Wells. Sir Tim Smit, who is the co-founder of the Eden Project, amongst many other things. Chris Fayers, who's head of environment at Hinkley Point. Everyone here's got a very long CV, so I'm paraphrasing very quickly key points. Georgia Stokes then, who is from the Somerset Wildlife Trust. And then finally, Environment Minister and local MP Conservative, Rebecca Pow. Thank you all for coming in. We'll break things down into a number of topics, 10 to 15 minutes on each of them. And a lot of the questions are quite wide-ranging. So if your question doesn't come up when you think it should have done, hopefully we'll come to it later on. But we're going to start tonight with climate change, a very particularly broad topic. And of course, the theme of these events is levelling up the conversation and making sure that we're looking through it in as local a system and as local eyes as possible. And if you are on social media and you want to get involved in the conversation, hashtag LUTC, levelling up the conversation, if you can. But the first question from Cara Naden, who's sent a message in from home. Will the government bring forward the target to be net zero or zero carbon by 2030 in line with local councils? And will the government stop supporting fossil fuels through financing, tax breaks and expansion planning? Well, we've got the Environment Minister in the room. Will the net zero target be brought forward?
Well, I think what you've got to say is this government was the first government, I think, in the world to commit to net zero by 2050. That was an enormous undertaking and, of course, has serious consequences for business who have to really get involved in all of this. And by signalling that, already we've got the massive change that we need, and that's backed up by our policies. So we can see, we're phasing out coal by 2024. We've already reduced our use of coal from 24% to 2%. That's absolutely massive. We've got our enormous renewable energy agenda, powered largely by offshore wind, with a commitment for 40 gigawatts by 2035, and that's really coming on stream really fast. We've got commitments to phase out petrol and diesel. All of these things will get us to net zero, and it's the fact that we've set ourselves a target that gives the signals that business need to go that way. And then also we all need to do it. Councils, have set their agendas as well. Somerset County Council, for example, is working hard to decarbonise its estate and so forth, and introduce electric vehicles. All of these things that will help us tackle this issue, which is the single biggest issue facing us. I've just been up and down the country because we've had these floods recently. Floods are obviously these more frequent floods. They're a consequence of this extreme weather we're getting, and we've got to expect more of that. And it is because of climate change. And whilst we've said that we're going to keep within 1.5 degrees of warming, that's what we're aiming at, and that's what the COP26 was focusing on, which we were so proud to be co-chairs of. We've also got to learn to adapt to it, to climate change, which is also an awful lot of the work that I'm involved with, and the Environment Act that I just brought through Parliament will enable us in so many ways to adapt to climate change. So we've got to tackle it, but also adapt to it.
Chris, if we come to you talking about power, how important is nuclear energy? Of course, we've got this massive building site, to put it politely, or mildly, I should say, just down the road at Hinkley Point. Nuclear power in terms of greening up our energy supplies, how important is it?
It's essential, really, for the greening up agenda. As Rebecca said, we need a balanced energy mix. So that involves wind and solar, but also we need nuclear. Nuclear's there to sort of support that power network and to support that wind energy when it's not windy and when the sun doesn't shine. What the project will bring secure energy and provide a real take away the reliance on gas that we have at the moment, and it will bring clean energy to 6 million homes, about 7% of the UK demand. And the really important thing to see about nuclear is also we've done a really detailed life cycle carbon analysis of it, and so the figures for new nuclear and HPC in particular come out at 5.5 kilograms of carbon per kilowatt hour. And that compares really well with wind and solar at 12 and 48, and massively lower than gas at 490. So whilst it looks like a big concrete construction site, actually, if you look at the entire life cycle of that power station, the carbon intensity is really low, and it will have a real key, anchoring in of that journey to net zero. So it provides that reliable base load for our network.
Just while we've got you, obviously we all woke up this morning to some quite worrying news in Ukraine in terms of the nuclear power plant there. Just very briefly, you were saying some reassuring things to me a little earlier about what the situation could be like. It certainly sounded very concerning.
Well, I think we're all really concerned about the people of Ukraine and what they're going through. So our hearts and thoughts go out to them. But in terms of the fire last night, that was in a training block, nothing to do with the operation of the power station. So I think that's the really key thing to focus on. It had no interruption of the power station, and as the understanding from the information I've received is that the Ukrainian workers at site are still in charge of the operation of that site. And whilst there'll be some posturing, no doubt, from the Russian regime have their own nuclear reactors. They know how important running these things and keeping them running safely is. So, I think it's reassuring that the existing Ukrainian workforce are in charge. So.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that. I think it's important we just touch on that. Georgia, are the targets to get to carbon neutral enough from a countryside point of view, do you think?
So I think what we need to really focus on is making sure they're delivered. It's good that we've got targets. I'd hope we can get there much sooner, but it's making sure that we actually have action to deliver them is going to be absolutely key. And nature, which is obviously the area that I am looking at, can play a really key part in helping us get to net zero, but it can't disguise from the fact that we need to reduce our emissions first. And then we can look at how nature can play a really key role, because we are experiencing two environmental emergencies. One is obviously the climate crisis, but one is also the ecological crisis. And we need to make sure that we are tackling both at the same time, because they're interrelated. And we need to make sure that we've got some very key targets, legally binding targets, around restoring biodiversity and our ecosystems.
So Tim, I was at COP26 for the whole 2 weeks, and probably the most impressive, or at least eye-catching stand was the Eden Project stand. These targets were discussed a lot up there. Do you think that the target of 2050 for the country to get to net zero is ambitious enough?
Well, let me change your question. I have a grandson who lives in the Maldives, 2 years old. My daughter-in-law is the Minister for Climate Change in the Maldives. Try having a conversation when it's existential as opposed to lifestyle choice. It's really interesting when you have that conversation and it's not dressed up in, oh, I don't want to go without this, I don't want to go without that. And we're actually in a position where we, all of us, are to blame for this. You cannot point your fingers at government and say they're not doing enough. The problem is us. We're not embracing a future that still remains ours to make, but which has different consumption patterns. And I'm hoping that as a collective, we, the British, we, the world population, will have been so influenced by the pandemic to realise that actually we are citizens first and consumers second. I actually get the sense there is a quiet revolution going on everywhere about this. So no, the targets aren't fierce enough. I think history will be very, very unkind to us. I also think, and this is not really a nice thing for me to say, I think it's great in sloganeering terms to talk about net zero, but the thing that no one is honest about is that some of the world's top scientists think it's a complete lie. That if you go for net zero, you've still got 30 years of backup carbon that you've still got to take into the system. And the problem with that is that if you were genuinely going for gross zero, then you could stick within 1.5. But people are not being honest. We're heading towards 3.5. And the worst of it is that it's like an S-curve. So you say, well, maybe we can live with 3.5. It actually means that that's how it averages out. In some parts of the world, people are actually going to boil to death. For real, they are. It's already incredibly close where you have temperatures up to 34, 35 degrees near moisture. There is no ability to sweat out. There's going to be huge numbers of deaths, and I think it's going to be far sooner than we thought.
Tessa. You were nodding along there, Tessa.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. I think the answer to Cara's question is no. There's no way that the government is going to bring forward its targets to 2030. It's good that local government is doing it, but it needs help in order to do that. And I think I'd just like to pick up the Hinkley point, if I may. And anyone who I have been avowedly anti-nuclear for all of my adult life, but that's because of the danger of the waste. And I think what's happened this morning, I know we're safe in the short term. Well, Ukraine is potentially safe in the short because it was in a training block, absolutely fine. But actually, we're going to face resource wars, and we've got all sorts of problems of having a massive target. If anybody, just pop down the road there, it's very lucky that that fire was there. But if somebody had actually tried to do something about it, and if you've got a nutter as a world leader somewhere, it's perfectly possible.
That'll never happen.
No, I know. Thank goodness for that. I'm talking in completely dream-worthy terms. But actually, nuclear has got a problem with its waste, and that problem's been all my adult life. They've been saying, next year, the year after, next year, it'll all be fine. Don't worry your pretty little head about it. There's the expense of the thing, and goodness me, we've been waiting for Hinkley for God knows how long. It takes a very long time to build these things. It's only going to last for 60 years, and that's actually what we really need to do, is look at tidal and wind and solar and get round to insulating people's homes, really, so that we actually remove the need for so much energy. So I could go on, I can see, but I do think we need to look at risk when we have massive projects, and that would be, I would actually include within that what probably most of us would regard as not exactly a friendly, possibly hostile regime in terms of China. I think we're going to have problems in years to come with China having such a big stake in our fuel and our energy. So I think there are many, many things that we need. The Climate Change Committee says we're not going to meet the fourth carbon budget, we're not going to hit the fifth carbon budget targets. There's all sorts of problems. And so I think actually the government isn't doing what it could do.
Is Jake Bonetta here at all? We've had a question. Well, he's a councillor in East Devon, and I think we've talked a bit there about renewable energies. His question is now the time to reintroduce a windfall tax on energy companies, but with the aim to invest it in a move towards new, greener energy. We've had a question come in from someone who's watching online this evening. Will the government stop subsidising the development of fossil fuels? Rebecca Pow, I know this strays slightly away from your government brief, but should the government be finding ways of raising money to develop more green energy rather than more traditional energy?
Well, the government are totally committed to green energy. As I said before, their offshore wind agenda is absolutely second to none. I went up to Grimsby recently and visited one of the offshore wind sites there. And it's also kick-starting loads and loads of green, what we call green jobs. There'll be lots of other green jobs in the nature side of tackling climate change, which was rightly raised just now, because that is the other side of the coin. And we are tackling that through all the work that we are doing with the Environment Act and the Environment Bill to restore nature by 2030. That's a massive target. But also, just on the side of...
Do those targets work?
Well, I think they do, because if you talk to business and industry, targets are the things that can encourage them to invest. Because we're going to rely on innovation and technology to get us out of this situation. I disagree with Tim Smit. We cannot go about being as negative as he is. I genuinely think the human race has it within them to be able to deal with this. And it is a crisis, I totally agree with that. But I think we are capable of handling it. And I do honestly think also what we did at COP26 was to lead the world in actually raising this issue of what's happening in other nations. We are committing billions of pounds, 12 billion initially from us in overseas climate finance, but a lot of it will come from investment from private and public to tackle these things that you're talking about, Tim. And we're doing a lot of work with the Maldives, actually, and in mangrove swamps and all of this to really tackle climate change on a big scale. But just back to your question was oil and gas, I think, wasn't it?
And in terms of whether the government is subsidising the development of using fossil fuels and oil and gas as our energy
we've committed to,
and not enough on green
energy.
energy.
We're phasing out coal. I mean, that's an enormous commitment. Again, by 2024, the oil and the gas, already those companies, they pay massive tax. They pay 40% tax, double what most businesses pay. And just as our friend here from Hinkley said, they will keep us going till we can be totally renewable. But look, I mean, in the light of what's happening right now in the world, I think, I'm pleased that we've already made this commitment to renewable energy and new sources of power. In fact, Tim will probably tell us about his geothermal power.
Well, we're going to come to Tim now, because Sarah Baker, who's watching from home, Sarah Baker, who's watching from home, says that in the southwest in particular, we have enormous potential with our coastlines, wave and tidal energy, and of course we have some particularly windy parts of with such exposed coastlines as well.
Can I just say though, David,
very briefly,
because this is all based in the sea, because there's a lot of opposition to offshore wind on land, so it's gone on sea. We also have a duty, which is my role as Environment Minister, to protect the sea. So we can have all the renewable energy, but we do have a commitment as well to protect our wonderful habitats, because they also provide us with so much opportunity for carbon sequestration, for kelp beds, for mud beds, for all of those things. So it's a joint, you have to do it together. Okay. It's all about balance.
So Tim?
How shall I phrase this? Okay, if I was Prime Minister, this country would be completely sustainable in terms of its energy by the year 2030. It is entirely possible. The issue is that we do not feel existential threat. I am actually very optimistic about the future, Rebecca. I actually believe we are going to have this transformation, but there's a bunch, and I include myself, of middle-aged men who are so wedded to the past and the industries of the past that they cannot reimagine the future. Brunel would be spinning in his grave to see the mediocrity that we have in charge of engineering, in charge of our universities and engineering. We've become really poor at all of that. Anyway, our deep geothermal under my ass, when I sit in my office at Eden, 5,380 meters beneath my bottom, we are getting 187 degrees centigrade. Next year, the Eden project is going to be completely energy independent. We'll be producing 3.8 megawatts. We're putting solar all over our car parks. So we'll be actually doing the background heating to 34,000 houses, and Eden will be carbon negative in the sense of neutral downwards, because the word negative and positive are interchangeable in this language. And it's possible. We're doing it here. And you know what? The other lie that goes out in Britain is, isn't it nice that the southwest has got hot rocks? The reason we've got hot rocks is we've got this big pus spot of granite that comes close to the surface. However, as you get out of fossil fuels, the cost of drilling will fall massively, which means that if you wanted to be heated in London, you've just got to go down to about 7 kilometers as opposed to 5.5. Once you start thinking of our nation as being able to access heat from the center of the earth, wherever you are, it's just a question of how deep you're going wherever you are, and then you put it in a palette of the things that Rebecca's talking about with offshore wind, with solar and all the rest of it, We can do this. It's actually easy. Sorry, it's easy.
Okay, now we are going to move on in a moment to talk about water farming. We haven't quite finished yet, don't worry. But just before we hear from Tessa and Georgia, who haven't spoken for a little while, anyone got any general questions on the climate change and energy? First hand, lady with the face mask on. I don't know whether you can just come up to the microphone. You might just have to point it up towards you. Yeah, okay.
It just came off.
That's all right. We can hear you, don't worry.
Okay. On the 2nd of February, Bristol Airport was allowed to expand by the Inspectorate. The Committee of Climate Change said there should be no extra capacity made on airports. The government, in its policies, aviation policies, is incredibly out of date. The inspectors use the 2013 policies to decide Bristol Airport's application and appeal. We are not going to meet the net zero target. We're not even going to meet the 6th carbon budget because aviation emissions are in it. Will the government please stop airport expansion?
Okay, thank you. I feel that question was probably addressed to Rebecca Pow, and I will put it to her very shortly. But Tessa Munt, let's bring you in here as a local councillor. There are these big projects that are seen to be needed that may go against climate ambition in terms of becoming greener, but people would still argue some of them are necessary. Where do politicians sit in this?
Well, I think one of the things I was going to point out, actually, was in response to Rebecca's answer, was the fact that actually tidal power, which is so critical here in the southwest because we have the second greatest tidal reach in the country, actually in the world. And so why is it that the Conservatives went into the 2019 election being the only major party, so the only people who also didn't even mention tidal, were the DUP, the BNP and UKIP. They're minor parties, but we've got a major party that is completely ignoring the ability to create massive amounts of power. And I can remember doing some work in 2012 and 2013 when I had the pleasure of working in Westminster with Swansea Tidal Lagoon Limited, and they were at that point, they could see quite clearly they were going to be able to power 24,000 homes from that one project, and they had 6 other projects lined up, so it would have been 7. And it would have done all sorts of things, apart from which it would also, here in our part of Somerset, given us some mitigation against flooding, because you can shut the bloody thing when the seas start rising. So I don't understand why, and it's a very simplistic view, I do accept, but I don't understand why it is that the government does not face up to the fact it's all very well focusing on giving lovely benefits to business and all the rest of it, but actually you've got, until we untie the link between political donations and funding and what happens in policy terms in this country. And, I will quote for one, the Minister for Clean Energy and Growth, who spent most of his time moonlighting, as far as I can see, for BP and Shell and Premier Oil. Until we get this sorted out, it happens in housing as well. We all know about the relationship between the developers and the Conservative Party. This has to stop so that people can make policy that is good for people, not good for their party or for them themselves.
Rebecca, if we can just address that question about Bristol Airport. Of course, there is this talk of trying to reduce our carbon footprint. Expanding our regional airport doesn't do that.
Yeah, and every department in government, as with every council, are all having a net zero strategy, working out how we can reduce our emissions. We're doing it with trees, restoring peat, and all of that in DEFRA.
The local council's not keen on the airport expansion.
The airports, I don't know whether the lady who asked the question ever does fly from Bristol Airport or ever has, but the point is, all of this has also to be about balance. I don't think tackling climate change has to be about stopping people doing things. This is why we have to harness innovation.
Just let her finish.
We can change what we do, of course we can, and we are, but we also have to harness tech and innovation and the R&D funding by this government is now greater than it's ever been, because we understand that that's what will get us through this with the policies. And in terms of the airport, which obviously isn't in my constituency, but what we need to do, and we are doing, is moving towards sustainable aviation. We can all choose to fly less, that's fine, that's our choice, but sustainable aviation, because we're not going to stop flying altogether. I think that's unrealistic. And we're already moving in that direction to have to carbon free, to change. There's so much research going on into new fuels for aviation. And there is, of course, a big levelling up link for these airports. So we have to have balance in it, but we do have to have our transport being sustainable. And if one does fly, try and get there by public transport. That's why we're pouring more money into our links to the airport by bus, rail. It's all very well laughing, but I mean, have any of you traveled? Do any of you travel? You have to also look at your own house, you know, and think, what can I do as well as government and its policies?
Okay, we're going to focus now on nature and biodiversity. And Georgia, let's bring you in here. We've had a question from home, I think one of your colleagues actually, Steve, basically saying, how can we turbocharge natural restoration so we can properly tackle the climate and ecological emergency, which of course you were talking about a little while ago?
Well, we do need to turbocharge it, obviously, because we know that that nature is in real trouble. We know that 41% of species in the UK are in decline. We know that globally a million species are facing extinction. And our ecosystems, we've destroyed them. You know, our ecosystems are not functioning and not giving us the things that we actually need. And they could help us with the climate emergency if we were investing in them and giving them the space that they need. So we do need to turbocharge it. The Environment Act that Rebecca mentioned is very welcome and gives us some really good tools. We need to see it consistently applied legally and enforced. So things like the local nature recovery strategies, which are part of the Environment Act, must be embedded in the planning system, must be linked to all other government policies. We need to make sure that there's not inconsistencies with government policies and how they're being delivered. We need to make sure that where on the one hand the investment in peat restoration is happening, which is very welcome, on the other hand we've got peat extraction continuing to happen in Somerset, which the recent IPCC report said is stupid, bordering on criminal, to be continuing that. That needs to stop now. I know there's a consultation, isn't there, which is happening. The Wildlife Trusts have done some calculations, and if we wait for 2024 to ban the sale of retail peat, which is what that's being proposed, then we think 1.5 million tonnes of carbon will be released in that time frame. So we need to act as though this is an emergency, and we need to take clear, decisive action now. And there are some quick wins. Peat extraction is a quick win. We should be banning peat extraction and supporting peat extractors. It's not about vilifying them or turning them into the bad guys, you know, supporting them to transition into something, a just and fair transition. So there's a lot we can do, but it's about swift, decisive action and consistency and embedding these things across decision-making process.
Tessa Munt, you've done local and national politics in terms of an MP and a councillor, the local nature recovery strategy. How can local councils ensure, or how can councils ensure, when developments are being given the go-ahead, that the environment is a priority, and how much of a priority should it be when we're trying to when there's a housing crisis at the same time?
Well, I mean, you know, we've got absolute catastrophe here in Somerset and in other counties. It's not just Somerset. You know, you've got Hampshire. There are counties in the north and all over the place who are the planning system has absolutely stopped. It's bogged down entirely in phosphates and nitrates and that sort of thing. So that's caused, as I understand it, the last figures I saw, it's 11,000 homes that are sort of locked up in the planning system. Nothing can happen until somebody makes some decision about something. Now, I have to say, Somerset West and Taunton, exactly where we are here now, has done something about it, which is great. So what they've done is they've used £2 million of their own budget, and everybody knows that councils are strapped. But they've used £2 million of their own budget. I think they're thinking about possibly of one of the things is to buy some land so that people can offset. But we can't have the whole flipping nation offsetting everything it does all the time, because you end up out of things to offset against, you know. So actually what we need to do is have some rules, please, that work if you're in government. Actually have some rules, then enforce them, and then fund independently the enforcement people. Because if you take the Office for Environmental Protection that's planned, that's going to be controlled by ministers, the budget's going to be controlled by ministers, the board's going to be controlled by ministers, and the rules are going to be controlled. They're going to just give a bit of this and that. So you have to have, and the same thing's happening with the Environment Agency. You know, it's utterly strapped for cash, and it's shocking because it can't do what we need it to do, and that is make sure that the polluter pays. That's the principle. And so I just think, you know, we need to make sure that the Environment Agency is funded properly, it's able to staff itself, and then we make sure that the whole business of, well, part of your question also related to the fact that we should be building in a much more environmentally friendly way. Of course we should. We need to give powers to local authorities to say that they can actually say this and this and this in planning. Why are we designing and allowing to build the slums of the future? This is madness. Everyone's going to have to retrofit, whereas if you actually gave a bit more muscle, when you, not you, you know, if you actually gave a bit more muscle, sorry, I'm getting a bit carried away, but you know, if we have a bit more of a muscular approach to planning and building standards, then at some point we can build houses that are fit for the future, fit for people, though they don't need to use the level of energy, much cheaper to run. What's not to like? I don't care if you're a climate denier or a climate, you know, encourager. Actually, what we have to do is just build for the future. Use our brains. It's all there. We've got some answers. We need to be much, much better at saying, this is how you have to do it, mate. Sorry, on your bike, you can take your blinking developments somewhere else. If you, it's the big developers that are a problem.
Right, well, I quickly reactivate my gym membership. Let's get a couple of questions from the audience. Well, obviously, farming and the farming policy and the way farms are funded and the way farmers are helped is changing now we're leaving the European Union. Had quite a few questions on that. Is Bob Harvey in the room at all? Or John Rellins? Okay. Or Melanie Squires from the NFU? Okay. Anyone, if we stick to the subject of farming, anyone here, I think there was one lady, so at the back, I don't know if you want to come forward to the microphones with a quick question around farming, if that's all right.
Thank you. Rebecca, you've tabled some questions yesterday, on the 3rd of March, on the environmental things. But the key thing missing in all these things that are coming out from government regarding the environment, you want greater access to the countryside. You're looking to plant some 30,000 hectares of land per year. Where's the government going to find 30,000 hectares to plant all these trees? But the biggest thing missing out of all these environmental things is food production, food security for the future. You've all eaten food today, but we haven't, in all these environmental things, you don't touch on the food okay. Security. You've signed, Rebecca, to support British agriculture, but what are you actually doing?
Okay, thank you very much. And I mentioned a few names earlier who'd sent in questions, which touch on the points that you were making there. Bob Harvey, who runs a farm not too far from here, about this new system said to be simple. When does he find time for farming? And someone who, John, who runs an allotment nearby, what are you going to do to help everyday people, farmers and small market gardens grow more environmentally friendly? Rebecca, there is this huge change to the way that farmers are expected to run their farms and to then get subsidies and help from the government. It's not simple though, is it?
I thank the gentleman for his question. We've met many times, I think, haven't we? But actually, I grew up on a farm, on a mixed family farm in Somerset, so I do understand farming. And I've also worked in environmental issues and growing food all my life. And obviously, it's absolutely critical that we produce sustainable food in this country. And all of our policies So through the Environment Act are for a sustainable future and environment. And our new farming system, and let's face it, we are giving farmers the same amount of money that they got through the Common Agricultural Policy, but now they will just have to do something for it. Instead of just owning land, which they got their money for, they will have to deliver some public goods. And amongst those public goods will be things like looking after your soil health, which to me is actually a no-brainer for a farmer. You know, to have healthy, sustainable soil, you will grow better crops, you will have better microbes in the soil, and you will have better all the insect life, which we so need to produce healthy food. And that's one of the key standards in our Sustainable Farming Initiative. You will also be paid to manage your hedgerows, and in which case there'll be more wildlife, which will also pay you dividends, because the wildlife helps to keep the whole natural ecosystem healthy, as do the insects. If we reduce the use of pesticides, because there's a big focus on bio controls rather than chemicals, and I visited many farms. I was out on one this very week where they're doing all of these things. And to get back to the points raised earlier about peat, don't worry, we're banning peat. We're banning peat by 2024, but we are moving very quickly so that a great deal of people have already stopped using peat. And we are also on the case of those licences which were raised. All of our policies through the Environment Act and our new Elms farming system will deliver a sustainable future, which is what people are asking for, and we desperately need. We need healthy soil, we need clean air, and we need clean water, and all of these things will feed into it. And we need a balanced and viable ecosystem where all of the creatures in it can survive and thrive. And we've set a target to halt the decline in species abundance, because yes, we have suffered a crash in our nature, and we've set a target of 2030, and that's massively challenging, but all of our policies combined will add up to help us get there.
Okay, so Tim, is this new way of farming, farmers being paid for public good, the right way forward?
Well, by and large, yes. In many ways, farmers, in my view, are the most important people in Britain, and we need to support farmers. And we need to see themselves as stewards of the land, not just food production. What's actually happening on the other side of the Atlantic is quite scary at the moment when you see the speed with which clean meat is taking over. I mean, it's a £1.9 billion industry at the moment. It will double next year. China is going into it real big time. There are going to be real changes in consumption. And then coming alongside that, you've got fermentation technology, which I know the government is aware of, but it's going to be huge. I mean, when you can bear in mind that we're using fermentation tanks, you can harvest the air and get you dairy proteins at 30% of the cost of dairy. My friends who are in dairy are really concerned, just like they're concerned at the fact they can go to a milk conference in Birmingham and find that it's sponsored by soya milk. There are a whole bunch of things here where we've got to be very supportive of farmers, but also it is a conservative business that has been led, if you like, by our desire, all our desire, to have cheap food. So we're paying far too little for the food that we eat, which means that farmers are actually, other than those that had millions of acres, thousands of acres, that were living on a big subsidy, small farmers in this country have had a bloody hard time of it. And I think that the Environment Bill and the, let's be apolitical, not party political about it. I think there's a real post-Brexit opportunity here to completely reshape farming, provided we help farmers to make that transition and actually work out whether what is being paid is ending up in the results that we need. But it's great. I mean, crikey, the Common Agricultural Policy was like put together by mad people.
Quite. David, can I just say,
very briefly, because we need to move on.
I've just visited a farmer who was on peatland, and they are re-wetting all of their peatland to sequester carbon. They are growing willows on it, which they're going to put through a pyrolysis system to create a charcoal. They're going to bury that in the soil to sequester more carbon, and they're going to grow their vegetables, because they're big vegetable growers, vertically indoors under lights. Well, I call that really thinking outside of the box for the future.
We've had a question here, if we move on to sort of discuss the water issues, from Harry, who's watching online. Practically none of our rivers are in a good ecological condition. In fact, I think there was a Commons Committee report saying there was pollution in every single one of them, and agricultural runoff and sewage discharge being the worst offenders. Tessa Munt, how do we solve that problem?
Right, so we need to get really, really muscular. If I tell you
Again.
that again, well, that's what it needs. That, you know, we can't hide from this stuff because there's two problems. Yes, there's runoff from farming, so we need to make sure that people, you know, farmers are actually spreading their slurry away from the watercourses. That's a logical thing. That happens mostly, but actually there's also soil degradation where people have planted maize and what have you. I know there is a move away from maize, but that will help if people keep their soils in good condition and then they can spread their slurry and it's not at the river edges. So that's one thing. We need to sort that. But, oh, there's that fire alarm. That's all right. There we are. How embarrassing. I feel sorry for you. I do. I've done it. I've been there.
It better not be you now.
I've been there. It is me now.
I've shown you how to turn your phone off.
No, I did turn my phone off. Now, what I want to get to is actually the really serious thing, and that is sewage pollution. And it is disgusting. We have 27 rivers in the Axbrew catchment, which is my part of the world. One of them has decent ecological status, and none of them has decent chemical status. All right? This is a disgrace. Wessex Water is thinking about doing something about it. But in the last 10 years, up until 2019, they spent £110 million went to their shareholders in dividends, which would suggest it's a really happy, healthy, go-for-it company. That's what that would say to me. I'm investing in a really good company. They're not. They spent £9 million in that 10 years on doing something about sewage pollution and what have you. What we have to do is make sure that it's sorted out at source so it never gets to our rivers. I appreciate that will take some money, but frankly, they could use some of the flipping dividends because actually it's not looking good if you're in Wessex Water. I have every empathy with all of those staff that work for them, but they just need to refocus on cleaning this stuff up because, you know, if you live in Sedgemoor, you're fine because your poo goes off to the Bristol Channel. If you live in Somerset West and Taunton, Mendip, and to a degree South Somerset, then it's going straight out onto the Ramsar sites, our levels. It goes onto the levels, and it poisons everything. So we need to really, really do something about this. It's disgusting.
Chris, but let's perhaps bring you in here. Should companies be made to pay for the waste, for want of better, that they create? Of course, the nuclear industry has huge waste of a different kind that it creates.
Well, we take our responsibilities to the environment really seriously. So we're building a huge construction site, but we have discharges from that site, and we take our responsibilities that really seriously. So we discharge some amounts of groundwater, which we pump out of the ground to ensure our construction site is stable, and that's really important. So there's a safety issue there, but we make sure that water is absolutely safe and meets really stringent criteria for putting it back into the Severn Estuary where it's actually going anyway. We're just sort of speeding up its journey, if you like. And actually, we have a sewage plant on site. So we deal with all our own sewage from all our 7,000 workers on site. And that sewage is treated to the highest standards. So it's a really good sewage plant. And actually, the controls we have on that are more stringent than would be on your normal municipal sewage plant. So I think it's really important. You know, all responsible companies want to take their responsibilities seriously. And we do that. And whilst it's a big construction site, we're working really carefully in the environment, and we work with our friends in Somerset Wildlife Trust and others on supporting Sturt Marshes, for example. And we've been surveying the birds and the sort of ecological life around the site since 2014, and it was really pleasing to see that the levels of birds around Sturt have gone up from sort of 19,000 up to 30,000 in my most recent survey, and the range of species has increased as well. So it's great to see that the work that the Somerset Wildlife Trust are doing, and we can help support, is really, you know, is improving, and it shows that developers can work with nature and support a really, you know, important, whilst building the biggest project that will deliver the biggest support to fighting climate change in the UK.
Okay, I saw your hand just go up there. If you could go to the mic just so the people at home can hear, if that's all right, and just introduce yourself at the start as well, please.
Yeah, my name's Katie Atwater, and I'm from the Stop Hinkley campaign. And I just wanted to talk about the government's love affair with EDF and the other waste that you produce. And a lot of people aren't aware that these new EPRs that you're building, This is the 4th EPR that's been built by EDF, and none of them are working so far. And the 4th one in China, Taishan, has closed down because it's releasing radioactivity, and it's only been running, for 6 months. The waste that will be stored at Hinkley C and will be produced by Hinkley C will be there for 200 years, and there's nowhere else it can go, and it's very hot, very high level waste. And that's a whole other ball game. You're building Hinkley C on a low level coastal shoreline, which is eroding, and we have climate change, and you have storm surges. And I think the government's fascination with such a complex and dangerous form of energy is really inappropriate at a time when we're trying to produce a safe environment going forwards into climate change.
Thank you.
And that's my point.
Thank you. Clearly concern about that in the room. What would you say?
Well, firstly, nuclear power and generating electricity through nuclear power is safe. It's not dangerous. We've got a long history in the UK of generating electricity from nuclear power, and it's a proud history. Okay, so I was saying nuclear power is absolutely safe, and we've got a proud history in the UK of running a fleet of nuclear power stations across the country very safely. The site is designed to be resilient to climate change, so it's suitably above so it's built on a platform, and it's above the highest predictions of sea level rise and storm surges. So all those things are taken into account in our safety case and the design of the plant. The waste isn't designated to be stored on site for 200 years. If the geological repository is built, which the government have plans to do, then it will be on site for No, it can be moved before then. It can be moved to the repository once. I can reassure you that it is safe, and it is safe to move, and that's how the waste stores are designed. So the power station is absolutely safe from sort of climate change in the future, and it operates very cleanly, and it's very safe. And there is an operating EPR in the world. The one in Okalooto is operating.
If we return to the questions about rivers, Rebecca Pow, what is the government doing? Because at the moment, this is a huge problem.
Yes, well, I actually wish Tessa would listen to what is happening, because actually I agree it is an issue and it is a problem and it is something we have to tackle. But I've made it an absolute priority as the Environment Minister.
But you voted against it. You voted against.
No, but that was complete nonsense. That was an absolute setup. So you know that through the Environment Act, I brought forward the measures to get these storm sewage overflows under control, and that was already in there before all of the public outcry. There's 6 pages of measures now to tackle our pollution, rightly so.
And when are you going to stop them?
To increase
from
more
doing
monitoring,
this,
more data, because we have to have the data in
when
reporting.
are you stopping
and we
the
are
water
clamping
companies?
down on people now. The Environment Agency have already been carrying out a high-level investigation, and I've been
don't need to investigate it
on the case of the water companies. I've had them all in, Tessa, and I have read the Riot Act to them and said.
So when are they stopping it?
Now
when are they
they're
stopping
working
using
on
their
it now. So
rubbish?
They are
They're
all
still
putting,
using their sewage
Okay,
outflows.
if you know so much about it, Tessa, I mean.
I've had the Riot Act read to me by Rebecca Pow, and we're still talking.
Yeah,
what though is the government going to do to force these companies to change?
Now, by law, they have to reduce the harm from these storm sewage overflows, which were only ever temporary measures for extremes of weather, and it's transpired that they're using them far too often. So now that's come to light, we can penalise them. We've already charged Southern Water £90 million, and trust me, there are lots of other fines coming. Thames Water,
You've seen the figures for Somerset.
So can I just finish?
Very briefly, yeah.
So also, it's not just that, but it's a whole raft of measures now being upped at water treatment works to get rid of the phosphate. The phosphate comes from our own sewage, okay? Yes. And we do have to link up with our housing developments, and we do have to make this link about what we produce from the houses and where it goes. We also are tackling farmers, because half of this pollution comes from farmers, so we are improving our farming rules for water to make them put the slurry on it, at appropriate times, not to grow crops near the riverbank. Maize is a terrible crop if you're near the river. We are working on all of this. We've got more inspectors, we've got more catchment sensitive advisors, and we do have to tackle it.
So we'll see the difference.
It's very serious, but we will see a difference because we've got starting now, and in their price review now, the water companies have to factor in how they're going to get rid of all this stuff, and what the regulator has been tasked by us, the ministers at DEFRA, to put the environment at the top of the agenda now, and getting rid of these storm sewage overflows. So that's an absolute legal commitment, and it will happen.
Okay, so Tim, I know you want to come in.
Yeah, we co-funded a film called Riverside last year with George Monbiot, and one of the really shocking things is, the river about which more poems have been written than any other in Britain is the River Wye. Yet today, if you swim in the River Wye, it is more likely you'll get a pair of sanitary towels around your gills rather than you'll see a trout. Now, I don't think this is political in the sense of party political, because actually, I eat chicken. Do you eat chicken? A lot of people here eat chicken? Have you seen the chicken farms up the River Wye? It's not the livestock, it's the chickens. God, they produce okay. This is no, but there's very funny. There is a problem here that we are very old school here. The same as government departments and university departments. We're not looking at the world in systems. So actually, every day, 4.5 million Alzheimer's victims are peeing in their toilets, drugs that are going into the ocean that are really damaging in combination with things. And that ocean, if it was producing more phytoplankton, will do far more than trees. And we're getting sold trees. I'm sorry to have a rant, but we're getting sold trees in terms of carbon sequestration. I have found in my experience that almost everybody who champions it have got something in common. They know sweet FA about trees. Because trees take a long time to get the capability to sequester carbon. And actually cleaning our rivers, if we could clean our rivers, we could do a heck of a lot of good for the global climate through the encouragement of phytoplankton, which is producing a huge amount of our oxygen and sequestering massive amounts of carbon. But this should not be party political. We should be talking here. You're rightly criticizing the water companies. In my view, the problem is we're seeing it as a company not behaving well. I think collectively our view should be, this is treason. It is treason. What you're doing is something which is a common good is actually being killed.
George, you're very patiently and quietly sitting there, but perhaps as we bring this section to an end, just how important from your perspective is it that this is addressed? Because what are we losing out as a result of this?
Yeah, it's a really important issue everywhere. It's very important for Somerset. So you're probably all aware, but all of the SSSIs on the Somerset levels and moors have been downgraded to unfavourable condition because of the water quality, which is due to the phosphates in the river system, because the eutrophication is preventing the ecosystem to thrive. So we're losing species, and it's absolutely horrendous, and we absolutely need to take action. And the measures that are in place at the moment, or the measures that are being developed, that I think Tessa was talking about related to the planning system, will only deliver neutrality. So they don't stop the phosphate, they stop additional phosphates going in, but they don't do anything about the load that's already in there, and it's 3 times higher than it ought to be. So there's a huge amount of work that we need to do. It's a very, very relevant problem for Somerset. And what, in a general sense, what I was also like to ask Rebecca, the Environmental Audit Committee had a report out in January and made a huge number of recommendations, which include things like giving Ofwat the powers to require 0 incidents by a certain set date, and to not allow bonuses to the chief execs of water companies if they have repeat incidents or serious incidents. There are hundreds of recommendations. Will the government implement all those recommendations?
Rebecca, very briefly, because I want to
So
bring
we're
in questions
taking
from the
on
audience as well.
board a lot of that, and the Environmental Audit Select Committee, is that the one you mean, made also a lot of recommendations. I have very open dialogue with them. We're taking on board a lot of those, and through the Environment Act, we're setting targets for water, and we will be setting targets on the storm sewage overflows, but also targets for the health of our water, targets for the phosphate, the nitrate, and the sediment, all that soil runoff.
When will we see those targets?
Well, they're coming out now. They're going to be the drafts. The drafts will be published very, very soon, and they have to go to Parliament by September. So it's all in train.
So it is in the next few months.
Yeah.
Okay. The gentleman who's been kindly looking after the microphone for most of the evening has been trying to catch my eye. If you just introduce yourself and.
John Hunt. I'm a local councillor. Good evening to the panel. By coincidence, this morning I had a local resident contact me with a photograph, which I'll gladly share with you all later. She's taken up wild swimming and goes down to the area here in the Tone where she can do that off Long Run Meadow there. And she sent me a photograph this morning of literally a sewage island in the middle of our river Tone here, which I've never seen the like of. And actually, apparently she's complained before to yourself, Rebecca, and had no response. I'm sorry, but that is what she said to me. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But my concern is, I appreciate that the sewage initially, when it was allowed to come out in lumps, was during, so for example, very heavy rainfall. You partially touched on this a moment ago. When there's very heavy rainfall, I kind of understand that because it does help to prevent flooding, albeit not very attractive. But what's happening now, of course, it does seem to be happening during summer months when actually there is no heavy rainfall. So my question basically is, similar to your last question, is when is this going to be put right? And for people like my resident, a wild swimmer, I should think she's furious swimmer at the moment, but I'll leave that with you. Thank you.
Thank you for that question.
Just to defend myself there, so if you give us her name, because I pride myself in the fact that Michael's here, who works in my office, in responding to every single person that ever contacts us, whatever it's about. Very happy to take that up, because actually, it is completely unacceptable. I'm not defending it. It is unacceptable, and that's why we're dealing with it. And one of the really important things is we have to separate our surface water from our sewage. We have to get the development rights back at the beginning, and actually, our local planning authorities can play their part in what happens in developments as well. So it's not all government.
All right. Well, what is very clear is we are running out of time, and there is a lot of passion in the room. And I know people will continue to have conversations afterwards, but you've probably got a minute each left. I think one of the key things that's come out of here is there is a feeling, certainly in the room and on this panel, that time to change is now and things need to change. So perhaps I can ask you all the same question. We'll start with you first, Tessa, and if we can try and keep it to roughly a minute. What needs to be the priority now in terms of the Southwest and our impact on climate change and our environment?
We need to make sure that local authorities, and we're going to end up with just one local authority, apart from parishes, of course.
Will that make it easier?
It might do. And there's an opportunity, I think, to set the pace and the tone and the scale of change to make sure that local authorities can look at what's happening in their local areas. That's what they're good at. And make sure that all of our development is not just business related and not just profit related. We actually put the environment absolutely top of this. I was the person who introduced the Climate and Ecological Emergency motion at Somerset County Council. That's a great motion. It's got fantastic results. Somerset West and Taunton got a higher result and much better grading for the work that it's done. But of all the county councils in the country, so Somerset's done really well. But actually what it needs is for government to listen to what powers local authorities need in order to make sure that they can do what's best for the people in their areas.
Okay, so Tim, we're proud of our corner of the country here.
You're proud of your what?
We're proud of our corner of the country here in the Southwest, aren't we? What should the priority be in terms of improving our environment?
Okay. If I have 1 minute, it would be to make a radical change to stop the politicizing of our environment. The only way we're actually... There are 2 areas, probably even 3 if you include health, but education and environment have really suffered in our country because we need to have complete governance of these things in the national interest. That phrase, the national interest, should become paramount.
Chris, what should our priorities be? Of course, a big few years for your company.
Yeah, I think we should be proud of the role that the South West is playing in delivering the low carbon economy for the UK. That's 6 million homes that the HBC will provide low carbon energy for, but also the £4.1 billion worth of investment that's gone into the South West from the project, and the 874 apprentices that we've already funded and put through work. So I think we're leaving a real legacy in the area, and we want to work, and we're working with local enterprise partnerships to make sure that legacy goes on into the future. Welding schools, electrical training schools, lots of things going on to support, making this a green economy in the local area, and maybe working with future projects like the Celtic Sea wind farm.
Georgia, what should our priority be from your point of view?
So I'm going to be cheeky and have two, sorry. So the first is to deal with the climate and nature emergency together, and not do things that would have a detrimental impact on one by promoting the other. So things like tree planting are great if you plant trees in the right place for the right reason. If you plant trees on a peat bog or something, that's absolutely not something that we should be doing, because it will damage our ecosystem. So that's number one. And number two is similar to Tim's, in that I think we need to stop polarising things and stop. So I was going to say, if I had the opportunity to answer the gentleman's question earlier around food growing, farmers are our stewards. They are the people who look after our land. It's not one or the other. We have to have both. We have to have nature and we have to have food. We need to work together and stop polarising it and making it an either or.
Rebecca, every one of us can do something to change, but you have a little bit more power than the rest of us. What should the priority be?
Yes, so, I was an environmental reporter for a long time, and as I often say, as a journalist, you can influence people. And I was apolitical, believe it or not. You can influence things, but to really change things, I began to realise you have to influence policy. And it really does make the difference. It can change the dial. And if you care to look at what's in the Environment Act, I truly believe that is changing the dial, and it's doing what I honestly think we all want. And it actually really annoys me that people have made this political. We should be doing this together. It's our world, and we should tackle it together, rather than this constant, attack. And if you look at what's in the Act, it genuinely do what you want, which is the two sides of the coin, tackling climate change and the nature emergency. And it is an emergency, and we have to deal with it. And I honestly was proud that Boris made me the Environment Minister, because I can try and make a difference. But we also all need to do our bit together, from no matter how lowly we think we are to whether we're running the government. We can all get involved, and that's what the game changer will be.
All right, thank you very much. And I'm afraid we could go on for hours and hours talking about this, and hopefully we covered most of the points that people wanted asking. So thank you very much for those who submitted questions. Apologies to those of you who didn't. And perhaps we could just finish. You may not have agreed with everything they said, but with just a little round of applause for the panel. And it was lovely to talk about something that people are so passionate about. And I suppose when people get passion, then they don't always agree. So thank you very much for coming tonight. And I hope you found it informative. And I'm sure the conversation will carry on for the next few minutes in the room anyway. All right. Thank you, everyone. Well done.